I, Quinton Lucas.
I, Quinton Lucas.
Kansas City officially under new leadership. Tuesday is primary election day in Kansas. We look at what's at stake. Plus, we look at how the rest of the week's news impacts you, your family, and your pocketbook.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nick Haynes, and glad to have you with us on this pithy and insightful journey through the news of your week. Pouring through our Metro's most impactful headlines, he is Mr. Up-to-Date on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske. From the Shawnee Mission Post, Jay Center. From 41 Action News, reporter Kat Reed, and columnist and editorial writer Dave Helling of your Kansas City Star. Now, I went out of town for a few days this week, and when I came back, all hell had broken loose. Sly James was no longer mayor of Kansas City, and a new leader had taken over.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I don't want to be a city where we have ribbon cuttings about stadiums or big infrastructure, but simply shrug about the violence in our streets, the mental illness we deal with, particularly among the homeless, and the drug addictions that plague our city every day. I ask you, all of my colleagues, to stand with me as we commit by the end of this term to getting our city off the FBI top 10 most dangerous cities list.
A snippet from the swearing-in ceremony of Quinton Lucas as the new mayor of Kansas City. But did we discover anything new about the leader of our Metro's largest city as he was officially sworn in this week, Kat Reed?
I don't think we discovered anything new. We heard a little bit more about the priorities in his first 100 days and in this first term. He did talk a lot about the free bus transportation as a major priority. He talked also about water rates and looking at that, which is a really big item that will take some time to tackle. But overall, we heard some of the things that we heard on the campaign trail.
There was some speculation earlier in the week that Sly James wouldn't even appear there. He wouldn't speak at that event. Did he take part in the ceremony, Steve?
You know, he did, Nick. He presented the new mayor with some gifts. He was gracious. He was kind to his successor, and that was really important. It's always an important moment for a city to see that. I don't think it served Sly James well. There were rumors that he was not going to be there. You know, we did a show on his legacy this week on Up to Date, and one thing that really struck me about it was some of the aspects of his legacy that have gone a little bit unnoticed. You know, equity for women, higher minimum wage, third grade reading proficiency, causes that didn't get a whole lot of attention, but all of which he was really committed to, even behind the scenes. Not showing up for this inauguration would have tarnished all of that, I think.
And the gifts were cufflinks, Kansas City cufflinks, plus a hip flask.
Hip flask.
Absolutely. Here's a snippet from that presentation.
Because there's going to be days when you're going to need to sneak away, have a little something, get it all back together.
Sly James, by the way, wasn't the only speaker at the swearing-in. In an unusual move, a prominent Kansan was also having a starring role. That's new Congresswoman Sharice Davids. Quinton Lucas is pledging cooperation with Kansas during his tenure as mayor. In fact, on a visit to Capitol Hill this week, he met with Kansas senators and representatives as well as Missouri lawmakers. What does this actually mean in practice, Dave?
Well, Kansas City obviously has interests in Washington, and a good relationship with senators and representatives from both sides of the state line will be important, particularly on things like Environmental Protection Agency rules and the continuing sewer build out and the cost of that. So that came up, although at one time we thought that was pretty close to resolution, may not be quite as close now. But I will say Mayor Lucas came to the Star this week and talked about his agenda. He's going to be a pretty busy man. He set the bar high on a range of issues. And at one point in the editorial board meeting, I said, Mayor, are you worried about getting a little tired? I mean, and like all incoming mayors, he says, no, we've got the handle on this. But my guess is that this wide range of things that he's talking about will be boiled down a little bit in the days and weeks ahead, and he'll focus on some one or two issues rather than try and do everything across the board.
One of his major issues also during his campaign and time on council was affordable housing and tenants' rights. And I will say that this morning I opened Twitter and saw for his first night on the job, he actually went and spent the night at one of the housing complexes that KC tenants are really concerned about. He had promised to do that on the trail, and he said, you know, here's a picture of us doing it. We're out here day one. I'm trying to make good on some of these promises.
He set up a housing committee, a special housing committee. He's on it. So housing will obviously be an early task for the mayor.
I'm interested in this sort of collaboration with Kansas, Jacinta, which seems to be a little bit of a different approach. I mean, how are Kansas side officials viewing this new mayor of Kansas City?
Well, I think it's interesting. You have Governor Laura Kelly set today to sign a proclamation setting some standards for this border war that you keep talking about. But when you look at the local level governments, I think it's going to be a very different set of considerations. Johnson County has got some serious tax issues ahead of it. The Kansas legislature passed a tax-led bill which kind of limits local government's abilities to adjust their tax rates. So any kind of idea about bi-state sort of tax proposals, I think would have a long way to go.
Could you imagine another bi-state tax happening because Quinton Lucas is the new mayor of Kansas City and somehow he will attract attention from Kansas and go along with a new tax?
You know, not in the short term, Nick, for all the reasons that Jay just pointed out. You need a lot of enthusiasm and momentum to push something as sweeping as a bi-state tax like we've seen in this community before. You also need a great target, and that seems a little elusive right now. One idea that's been kicked around for years is, you know, a tax for the museums, the arts organizations in the area. But there hasn't been much talk about that for a while, and I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for it.
Yeah, I think, in fact, during the campaign, Mayor Lucas explicitly ruled out new taxes, at least in the short term, medium term. So I don't think that's likely. And I do think the school districts will have some sort of pre-K property tax related proposal that may come forward in the next 12 to 18 months. So we'll see how that works. But taxes aren't really the issue. The issue is, can Mayor Lucas and the new administration tackle things like potholes, trash removal, crime, which he talked about a lot, and then throw in an initiative like free bus transportation or affordable housing as a pilot project. If he can do that in the next 12 to 18 months, he'll look back and think it was pretty successful.
Now, well, for some people this week, the biggest news story of the week was getting their hands on a box of limited edition Mahomes Magic Crunch breakfast cereal. There were a lot of other important stories grabbing the headlines. One of those is the election. You didn't know there was one? Well, Tuesday is primary election day in Kansas. How come we haven't heard much about it, Jacinta?
Well, I mean, these are local level government elections. So you've got city council races and, you know, a number of pretty small cities. So these are the kind of races that show up on a few hundred ballots as opposed to tens of thousands of ballots or whatever. But if you're looking for a reason to participate, I always like to point out these positions that are closest to the people, you get the most bang for your buck in terms of voting. So if you want to see change, go out to the polls.
There are smaller offices, but important, as you mentioned, there are 13 candidates running for 3 slots on the Johnson County Community College Board of Trustees. No one can remember the last time there's been this much interest. It may sound like small fry to some, but Dave Lindstrom is on the college board, and he's now running to be the United States Senator, Steve.
Yes, and I'll just point out there have been are a number of issues involving the community college and our community, a rise in the cost of tuition out there. There's been a lot of tension between the faculty and the administration over pay raises and salary and other issues out there. The president out there, Joe Sopcich, stepped in it a few months ago with a very impolitic comment about how much money his students have and what they can afford to go to school there. A lot of tensions, and that's why you've seen so many candidates rush in, because they think there's a lot of issues out there.
How much were the president's comments that were recorded at that Washington hotel about really there's no poor students at Johnson County Community College? How much of that was a driving force in getting all these candidates?
I mean, I think it's one of a myriad of issues. I should point out my mother's taught at JCCC for 25 years. So
and my wife has taught there for 25 years. But there's another disclosure. Yes.
But I will say, I mean, the closing of the track and field program.
Yes.
There have been prolonged tensions between the faculty and the administration. So it's a range of issues, and I think it's the fact that there was this kind of stew of things that really brought that field of candidates
Just
out.
briefly, the other dynamic that's really interesting and important, Michael Ryan of the Star has a column on this on the JCC election today, apparently there's partisanship starting to leak in. Democrats running a slate and Republicans concerned about that. And that is a phenomenon, partisanship, if you will, that extends beyond the junior college to other elected boards and commissions, including the Johnson County Commission. I think increasingly we're seeing partisan Democratic Republican tensions coming up in city councils and mayor's races and community college board races that were not apparent in Johnson County as late as 10, 20 years ago.
Ken.
One of the candidates actually mentioned the reason why she got involved, part of the reason why she's running in one of these races is because of the 2016 election. So you are seeing a lot of people who are fired up by that election and now deciding to seek office for themselves.
You know, the largest city in Johnson County will also have one of the most active election cycles in recent memory. Every one of the 6 council seats in Overland Park is being heavily contested. This is the city, by the way, that was just named the #1 place in America to raise a family. What are people so unhappy about that they want to challenge and change out their elected officials, Jay?
Overland Park has developed a reputation as being a very kind of stable establishment city government. And it's also had a very pro-growth posture over the course of the past 15, 20 years. There has been sort of a rising sentiment among pockets of the community that, one, it has been giving handouts to developers for too long, and frankly, it's like
So that's not just a Kansas City, Missouri thing.
No.
Yes.
It's really, really big in Overland Park, and these tax incentive tools are being used for greenfield development way out south and just field. So not what the tools were initially developed for. There also is sort of a sentiment that when pockets of citizens organize, say, hey, listen, we're not comfortable with the way the city's going, they're not being listened to. And so that's behind at least a few of these challenges.
You know, it is amazing the extent to which Overland Park faces some of the same issues that Kansas City, Missouri does, Nick. Overland Park is a city of 200,000 residents now. It is the second largest city in Kansas, and therefore you see some of these same issues cropping up. Affordable housing, transportation, infrastructure, incentives for developers, as Jay said. It's the same issue menu to some degree as you see in Kansas City, Missouri. And again, that begins to explain why candidates are rushing in.
Now, as we started the show talking about the new mayor of Kansas City, Quinton Lucas, I find it interesting that in Johnson County, 2 prominent mayors are running this year totally unopposed. Peggy Dunn has been the mayor of Leawood for 22 years. She has no opponent on the ballot on Tuesday. Neither does the mayor of Lenexa, Mike Boehm. He's led that city for 16 years. How is that, Dave?
Well, suburban elections are often like that, Nick. If the residents are more or less satisfied with execution of city government, then the person at the top, who often takes those positions, by the way, as sort of a noblesse oblige, are reelected. Now, Peggy Dunn is kind of an institution in Leawood, so that's explainable in part that way too. Mike Boehm is a more interesting case, and I say this as a resident of Lenexa. I gave a speech out there a couple of years ago to the chamber, and I said, you know, your mill levy is pretty high out here in Lenexa. It's like double what Overland Parks is. And Mayor Boehm was very upset that I brought that up, some other council members. Steve is exactly right that the problems of Kansas City, Missouri, or the issues or challenges are beginning to migrate to the suburbs. And Overland Park is an example. Lenexa is getting criticized for incentives as well. Big-time politics may soon come to those communities.
But there's no term limits, of course, and there's very little pay for these mayors. Unlike Kansas City, Missouri, Kat, you were reporting the new mayor is going to make $140-something thousand. The mayor of Leawood makes $800 a year.
Yeah, and so there has been a pretty decent amount of conversation in all of these kind of smaller Johnson County cities over the past few years about, you know, are we precluding people from being able to serve because they just don't have the time to volunteer and not get any kind of financial consideration for it? So you've seen conversations like that going on. But I would say, you know, in the case of Mayor Dunn and Mayor Boehm, like, things have been going pretty well in Leawood and Lenexa by and large, and because of their successes in the cities, you don't see many people wanting to stand up and challenge them just yet.
While Tuesday's election is mostly happening on the Kansas side, voters in Lee Summit will also be heading to the polls in a special election. They're deciding whether to approve spending nearly $20 million to equip police officers with body cameras, plus funding renovations to police headquarters and the building of 2 new fire stations. Supporters say it is a bond election and will not lead to a tax increase. It's finally sinking in this week. The name of one of Kansas City's most prominent companies is about to disappear. The Justice Department approving a bid by T-Mobile to buy Overland Park-based Sprint, and CNBC reports that the new combined company will just call itself T-Mobile and ditch the Sprint brand altogether. Now, I know our hometown cell phone company is smaller than it's ever been, but I've been surprised that this latest news is not causing more indignation and alarm in Overland Park, Kat.
Well, I think that there was always talk of this all being under the T-Mobile umbrella, but the thing that people have been holding on to is the promise T-Mobile made to have a second headquarters and have it in Overland Park at the Sprint campus. Now, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. That's just what the CEO has said would happen. So I think that people are just really hoping that at least they can hold on to that. There used to be 26,000 employees out there in its heyday. They're down to 6,000, but have plenty of space out there in that building.
You know, there's a lot of concern, to underscore Kat's point, about the future of Sprint and its any presence in Overland Park going forward. You know, you just look at Sprint's own history, Nick. You go back to 2005, Sprint merges with Nextel, and there were corporate headquarters in Virginia and in Overland Park. Sprint was going to keep both. Well, 3 years later, Sprint closes the Virginia headquarters and consolidates things here in Overland Park. There are a lot of folks who suspect the same thing's going to happen here, not to our advantage this
Does
time.
this come up in the Overland Park City Council races at all, or is it not an insignificant aspect of it?
It hasn't yet. I mean, frankly, I think just because it's so new. But the Business Journal was just talking this week about how, you know, the flagging fortunes of Sprint are likely to have a pretty big impact on the housing market in Overland Park, and that's going to be a major tax consideration.
And we also have Sprint Center here in town. Will that, if there's no Sprint left in Kansas City, will we be seeing a name change there, possibly to say Mayor Sly James Arena? Carried, why not?
We haven't heard anything yet about a name change. T-Mobile does have its own arena already, so the verdict is out on that.
It could happen. It could happen.
Yeah. Sly James would not want the arena named after him because he doesn't care about his legacy, as he's told us repeatedly in this legacy tour in the last 2 weeks. In conversations leading up to Mayor Lucas's inaugural, though, Nick, we've talked to a lot of business leaders and other community people. Sprint is a symptom of a problem in Kansas City, and that is a lack of a huge, important corporate presence. We're almost alone among major American cities. We don't have a big Fortune 500 presence like Minneapolis, or even to some degree St. Louis and Cincinnati, other cities. That's a problem, because while our growth has been good over the last couple of years, it hasn't been great. We don't slump quite as much as other cities, but we don't grow as much during the good times. And that's one of the challenges I think Mayor Lucas is going to face, and why Sprint is not just a story in Johnson County and Overland Park, but the broader metropolitan area.
Another reprieve in Jackson County. If you're one of those people totally incensed by how your home or business was recently appraised, they're extending the deadline for a second time. Now you have until the beginning of September to file an appeal. Is there a fix in sight, or is this just kicking the can down the road, Kat?
Well, this is giving people more time to put their appeals together, because remember, there were two processes going on at the same time. The informal appeals with the assessor, the formal appeals with the Board of Equalization. And there were people who hadn't heard back yet from the informal process, so they didn't know what the assessor had said. This gives some more time for folks to hear back from them and then go through the formal process. Also, there's just a huge volume of appeals. This gives more time to put those together.
I don't know how they're going to manage the appeals process. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of these things now stacking up, Nick. These volunteer commissions having to sort through hundreds of these things every time they meet. It's extraordinary. To underscore a point David's made on the show in the past, Nick, you know, there may not be a reason to panic here. In theory, there shouldn't be, because every taxing jurisdiction in Jackson County can lower their rates to deal with this. You know, there's an equation here. It's the tax rate times your value of your home that equals how much you pay for property taxes. If you lower that tax rate, you won't see a bump. So we're going to be a lot of pressure on these different jurisdictions to take care of that going forward.
Jacinta, there's also alarm bells ringing in Johnson County too over property taxes. The words catastrophic and tsunami have been used. We have school districts in Johnson County saying this may force them to make big cuts. Cities alarmed that they may have to slash services. Is this the same thing that's happening on Jackson County, or is this something different?
This is a different thing. So this is related to commercial property valuations. Over the past few years, big box retailers, Walmart, Target, CVS, these kinds of companies have said that Johnson County's appraiser's office overvalued them. And as a result, they were forced to pay millions and millions more in property taxes than they should have been. They've taken these appeals to the Kansas Board of Tax Appeals, and just in recent weeks, that board sided with Walmart in one of these big cases. So, most important to point out, this is not happening overnight. There's going to be years and years of this getting tied up in the tax board and the courts and things like that. However, if these big box retailers are successful broadly, as much as $133 million in annual revenue that goes to Johnson County taxing districts, cities, the county school district, libraries is at stake. Not only that, these cities may actually have to pay back money that they collected based on those supposedly too high property valuations. Overland Park's city manager said it could threaten as much as 30% of their total tax revenue. So yes, it's a big, big deal.
Yeah. I would only add quickly that there is something that ties these two stories together, and that is the property tax is a weird, weird thing.
Yes.
It's the only tax that we levy that's based largely on a guess. I kind of think your house is worth this. I kind of think your retail store might bring this amount of money. It's like, I told somebody yesterday, it's like going into a restaurant and going, I think that cup of coffee is worth roughly $2, so that's how I'll impose sales tax. We don't do that on sales taxes, of course. We don't do it on income taxes. Somehow property taxes, and that's why people get angry, and that's why these kinds of stories surface almost every year.
Now, there is some good news, by the way, on the tax front. This weekend is Missouri sales tax holiday weekend, which means there is no tax on school supplies, on clothes priced at less than $100, and no tax on laptops and personal computers worth less than $1,500. That tax holiday in effect until midnight on Sunday. It's been talked about for quite some time. Now it's official. A challenge to Sharice Davids for the Kansas 3rd Congressional District seat.
I'm Sarah Hart-Weir, and this is my best friend, Casey. For almost 2 decades, we've been by each other's side.
Sarah Hart-Weir, a Republican, says she led the largest advocacy organization in the world for people with Down syndrome.
And like you, I'm fed up with the extreme socialist agenda coming out of Washington. That's why today, I'm announcing I'm running for Congress.
Her opening video is by and large a soft-toned personality profile, and you hear very little about her positions on key dividing issues like immigration. Is that intentional, Kat?
Well, I think probably intentional to just as this first ad. We'll see more as the campaign goes on. But one thing I wanted to point out, she talks about the socialist agenda there. Sharice Davids is in an interesting position where she really, can't win in a sense. She's been criticized from the left for not going along with things, the Green New Deal, some hesitation on Medicare for all, and then from the right, still being called a socialist for being with the left.
I saw a lot of press releases this week from the Kansas Democratic Party calling her in the pockets of the big drug companies. She was leading the largest Down syndrome organization in America. What is this connection with big drugs?
Well, prior to her position with that nonprofit, she was a lobbyist for GlaxoSmithKline. So she does have some ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And I would point out, during the 2018 campaign, Republicans' positions on health care were one of sort of Sharice Davids' main issues that she brought up. So Sarah Hart-Weir is going to have to give specifics on where she stands.
And just to be really clear here, Nick, she may not be the only Republican candidate for the nomination. There's a woman named Amanda Atkins, a former Republican Party chairwoman for the state of Kansas, very close to former Governor Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier, who's been making all kinds of soundings that she might run. She has national political connections across the country. She would be formidable. And I also want to point out, speaking of formidable, Sharice Davids hasn't exactly, she's handled herself pretty well in the early goings, has not tied herself to the liberal wing of her party, as Kat points out, staying away from Medicare for all, staying away from impeaching President Donald Trump. And, she's not a lefty. At least it'd be hard to pigeonhole her that way so far. That's very smart, I think, for her re-election prospects.
I just say very briefly, Kat said that she can't win because she's getting attacked from the left and the right. That arguably is how she does win, by getting attacked from the left and the right and being centrist, which I think the 3rd District wants to see. Having said that, a freshman congressman or woman is always the most vulnerable after the first term, and that's why you see so much Republican interest in this race.
It's not a full Jay Center appearance on Kansas City Week in Review without at least some mention of the most beleaguered piece of real estate in our entire metro. I'm talking about the site of the former Mission Mall. It's been 13 years since it was closed closed and demolished. And while we've been told it's now full steam ahead, I saw an interesting report on 41 Action News in the last few days that claims there's no progress, and now we have people living there saying this is the biggest joke in history. Weren't we told it's now ready to go and it would open in December 2022 as one of the biggest metro entertainment complexes, Jay?
I've said a lot of things about that property over the years, Nick. But I mean, I will say I drove by this morning and it was looking pretty quiet. They have completed a big pad site for this Synergy movie entertainment complex that they're saying is now going to be the first thing that they're going to get out of the ground. But they've really only done the very bare minimum that they were required to do to get the tax incentives the city of Mission gave them. So,
you know, a lot of folks are saying something very unusual is going on here. There's been some talk that the developers waiting for a permit from the Johnson County wastewater people, maybe, but to tie this operation, this development up this long without any progress for a permit doesn't make sense to a lot of people. They're wondering if there's more financial issues attached to the developer here, Nick, or not. It looks pretty funny.
So this would be December 2022 is when they went open, and in 2023 we're supposed to have the KCI Airport. 2023 is supposed to be the streetcar expansion down to UMKC and the plaza. Which is most likely to actually happen first?
I think the streetcar, maybe. I mean, I think funding for the streetcar will come forward, and the airport's going to be done, I think, reasonably on time. The Mission Mall may be a story on Week in Review 2040 in Kansas City.
I was actually just out of town, and we were getting our airport bus, and the driver says that he believes that KCI Airport, the Chiefs will win the Super Bowl prior to the airport winning. He's telling that to all of these out-of-town visitors coming in.
Oh, I think that could be a reality.
Yeah. As long as Patrick Mahomes eats his Wheaties.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers, keeping you up to date weekday mornings at 11 on KCUR-FM, Steve Kraske, and from 41 Action News, Kat Reed, from the Shawnee Mission Post, Jay Center, and Dave Helling of your Kansas City Star. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.